I declare the meeting start at 5:38 p.m. Acknowledge the traditional owners. We'd like to acknowledge that the land we meet on today is the traditional owner. Sorry, let me just have it down. It's the traditional land of the Ghana people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with the country. We also acknowledge that the Ghana people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and their cultural and heritage beliefs is still as important to the living Ghana people today. Declaration of conflicts of interest that all directors and officers in attendance declare that they will read, they have read and consider all papers within this agenda, they require decision making, and have no known conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest with respect to these matters. Anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? If there's none on start agenda items, does anyone wish to start any agenda item?
I believe if it's just the Schedule 4 changes. Is that
Sure.
yeah, that's not start.
Is that the only one you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay. The recommendation reads that all on-start items are approved. Can I have a mover for the resolution? Moved by Isaac. Can I have a seconder for that resolution? Seconded by Luke. Is there any dissent? Declare that carried. So that minutes has passed. YouX President's report. I will pass the chair to Isaac. 5:39 p.m.
Accepted, right?
I guess people are not that happy because I got my voice back, so I can speak at length today. Look, I think as everyone we noted, the biggest thing that we have done recently is a rebrand. I think it's been incredibly successful to see the rollout happening. We have a couple of hiccups on the way, I have to admit, in terms of the some comms that has been fixed up in around this because there's some confusions around clubs. But overall, I think it's been really positive, really encouraging. As I was informed by Gary that we have increased our membership sales compared to last year. Is that correct, Gary?
Yeah, we're nearly 100, which typically we wouldn't do in any mid-year, so that's good.
Yeah, so it's much better, and I think it's a strong endorsement of a rebrand and the new brand, and despite all the negative sentiments that may have been portrayed out there, and it was really encouraging that I was actually got to speak to a student who was a student here, took a leave, and then came back and decided to buy a membership from us because we rebranded and compared to the old name. So I think that's great. And as a procedural matter, I formally informed the board that all our policy and rules has now been updated with reference to our new branding as required by the Constitution. Yeah. Something else I need to mention. Infrastructure has talked about the learning and teaching transformation space. Media inquiry, I've got pretty much again the same thing. Simone and Kieran to provide response to those media inquiries, especially on new branding. I have to wake up. Sorry, is that online?
Yeah.
Okay. I had to wake up at 7 o'clock, I think, for one day for a radio interview. It wasn't that fun, but we got that.
That's why you paid the big bucks, Oscar.
So I probably should.
You on the radio.
Oh yeah. I probably should actually quote this. I forgot to change because I was in the middle of the night. But that's the gist of it. Sexual misconduct policy has gone up for consultation. We spoke about that in the SEC meeting recently. It's a big piece of work, really great, I think, progress towards the KPMG report. And it's one of the main recommendations. And I'll be involved in the advisory group, and I'll be providing opinion on behalf of UX about how that can be best reflected. I provided some of my opinions around SEC as well. Should directors have any issues with that or any particular thing they want to raise, feel free to raise that with me. Thanks to directors for saying yes to open day volunteering. Great campus kitchen. It's a very hot topic recently in Overhead. I saw a couple of posts. Unfortunately, I think it has been misinformed by a certain student. I've clarified to that student privately, and the students has still chosen to take that to Overhead again. Basically, as summary, it's not our space, it's us Adelaide space. But now since they're no longer out there, they have finally put a petition around there to say that's a staff kitchen.
It hasn't been our space for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Just for fact, if anyone wants a fact to confuse the fiction.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was unfortunate the way that the student has chosen to portray the issue. I have engaged that, and I've engaged the university on that issue as well. But that's not as much as we can do around the space.
And said student, sorry, just to add, was advised that it wasn't our space in January this year. So informally in writing and told who she should contact. So politics beautifully.
So clubs committee meeting. So I'll probably let Luke speak a bit more. We have considered a range of items, a couple of items that probably can talk about that in your report, especially around the 50%.
Yeah, I think pretty much we're discussing at the clubs committee level, but essentially currently clubs are able to register with only a 50% student ratio, which if we're being realistic is way too low considering most of the clubs are funded by student money. So in the actual meeting we were discussing what sort of percentage we could raise it to, and I believe we want to conduct a quick little poll, get some student feedback on that, just to make sure we're not missing any sort of adverse effects by doing so. But once we've arranged that, and it'll probably come up in the next board meeting, we'll be looking at raising the minimum percentage of students in clubs to ensure that it's students that are benefiting from self-funding and not external people. That's pretty
Do
much
we know how many non-students are members of clubs?
We
the
don't
records
get
are all a bit grey. It's not a great issue except for potentially one, which we've addressed or are addressing. But essentially, we want to change the constitution so that if the issue does arise, this is how it is. Yeah, so it's actually currently not really an issue, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's something that we are looking into, and as I said to the board, my commitment is to ensure that if we can do a consultative approach, and if it's not an urgent issue, we will consult clubs, which we do in this case. So the report will go to clubs committee for further consideration by the clubs committee, and that recommendation will come up from that. So is there any other thing since that we're on clubs committee?
No, Kat hasn't got back to me yet. I'll touch base with her again.
Okay, so other things, student confer concerns, that's been addressed. I think you will probably have seen my response on overhead. So gap fee of Adelaide University Healthcare, so that's a big thing. It was initially introduced that gap fee was going to be introduced. Some students posted in overhead. I took that up pretty quickly to Martin, and Martin then took that up to Colleen, and long conversation had with Adelaide Uni Care. And obviously they have listened to student concerns, and since then have officially rolled back the gap fees as we speak. And they'll probably be, I think, releasing a statement pretty soon on that as well. I think it's a really positive outcome. I think that, in my view, since they're using their university space, they should ensure that students provide bulk billing options. Although they're noting there has been some pressures around that system, but I think that's my view on that issue. And I do appreciate the university has been addressing that pretty quickly. So students will now be expected to not be charged a gap fee. Although that's only for domestic students, though, international students are a bit different.
Well, thanks, Oscar. I was going to ask, oops.
Yeah, international students is an issue that I've been advocating for some time. So that was a bit more challenging, I think, in terms of how much money to get back from Allianz or other insurance partner. So let's see what else I want to speak on. So I worked with Adelaide, the medical students as well, to send an email to university around a letter, actually, formal letter to Jenny, to talking about wanting more counseling sessions, because I believe previously it was in AHMS, and now it's no longer in AHMS. They need to actually come to North Terrace, and they are talking about wanting more after hours support, which I think is much needed, because looking at how medical students have been dealing with, which Emily have been discussing with Emily a great deal on this issue as well, because the stress that medical students feel are just very different, and I think much more intense in some cases as well. So we are looking into restoring some counselling support, or hopefully back in HMS, which Esther is involved as well, since she is just a nursing student. That's probably how much I want to speak on it. I also helped an issue. There's been some confusion around students having to involve in some compulsory course, but wasn't listed in the double degree. and I'm glad that the faculty of Able and SET pretty much took that instantly and to resolve that issue pretty much the next day. So I'm actually quite grateful for that because it was the last day of students adding courses.
Any questions for Oscar? I can have one. When can we change the building to UX House?
I think that's up to the university. It's probably a question of Michael now.
Be run for the Estates Committee,
For what?
or the Estates Committee that names buildings.
Oh.
Okay.
You're looking very casual, by the way, aren't you?
I didn't work today.
It's put me off.
Yeah. Sorry. Apologies. Anything further? Okay, I pass the chair back to Oscar at 5:49.
Thank you, Isaac. Is there anything further you want to add on your report, Luke, on COPS committee?
No, not currently.
Okay.
Aside from the next meeting's already scheduled. Yes, there's nothing else present.
Rule concerning in-camera, Felix.
Yes, very excited to talk about this.
Do we need to move in camera?
No, funnily enough, the in-camera rule can be debated ex-camera. I will just mention before I note this, Oscar and I, we both found a typo when the rule was sort of constituted. If you could go down a bit,
Yeah.
Oscar, down to the prohibited by law thing that we found earlier.
Yeah, what did you want to change that to?
So my suggestion was, 2.8.6, change that to matters whose disclosure would be prohibited by law. Otherwise, that would not make sense as it currently stands.
Angela, did you get that?
I can send.
Something not prohibited.
I'll send that to you.
Not that well.
Angela. And that's 2.8.6. So excluding that component, basically in camera and sort of transparency issues have been a huge issue with path forwards. There's been a lot of sort of criticism of that by external groups and even by directors present here. And so I've drafted a rule that I think would very carefully, it's been very carefully drafted, that I think would adequately resolve a lot of these transparency issues. There's a lot of balance here between trying to ensure that genuinely confidential information remains confidential and therefore the property of UX, while also allowing anything that's not really confidential to be published, so that students can see what their SAF payer, their SAF is going to pay for. So I'm not going to go into all of the sections, but basically it's now very difficult, if this were to pass, it'd be very difficult to classify matters that are not genuinely confidential in nature as confidential. You only need one vote on the executive to stop something being classified as confidential. The executive have to rubber stamp, basically, certain things, and if one director on the executive objects to a classification that the president has given on something that's not included in a preset list of very reasonable things that should be in camera, then that can't be classified as in camera. No rule, policy, or schedule can be debated in camera unless there's a unanimous vote by the executive, unless it pertains to something there. And any rules, policy, schedules that have been debated in camera will be, the text of the changes will be published in minutes, which will go ex camera by the executive, and all sort of discussion and stuff will be redacted, but the actual fact that something has changed in the wording, that will be published. So I think it strikes a good balance, and I highly advise the directors support increased transparency on UX.
Any comments, concerns? Yes, Gary.
Does clause 6.1 mean that, having said all that, if the board resolves by a sensible majority to go in camera, it still can, regardless of everything else you've just written? I don't understand.
Yes, so that is literally just because the board has the power in the constitution to go in camera by simple, well, to have a confidential session.
At the moment, so you can still have show of hands and go in camera.
Yeah, I don't see why. I mean, I'm not sure if we can actually remove that, because that is a constitutional provision.
Probably a Corporations Act thing as well, I suspect. But anyway,
yeah. But again, that assumes that you have 6 people.
I'd just say, from a completely independent perspective, It's really well written. The reality is, if this board had trust and respect for one another, you don't need it. And there's very few boards in the country who would have an in-camera rule like this, because they would be on the board because they trust one another and are all aiming at the same thing.
So I think trust might be a short supply in at least previous boards.
So all I'm saying is this is a
band.
band-aid. It doesn't reflect what the real issue is with the board. So
Well, I hope that students would like at least some action on this,
no.
since I can't deliver cultural change by myself.
You can try though.
Well,
Don't
look,
give up on
I
that,
have tried.
Felix.
I
Don't
have
give up on
tried.
that. You might have everyone in blue vests eventually.
Does anyone have any concerns on this? Comments? I do note that. Yes,
Before,
Grace.
was that Gary speaking?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I do note that the chancellor, this has to go to the chancellor, or the council, sorry, and the chancellor has requested us to put any rule changes to be reviewed by legal and risks. And since my position in council, I'll be abstaining from this vote. Just for context.
Do you think it actually needs to go to legal and risk now before you vote on it? Because they're bound to have concerns and want to edit it and change it.
Well, look, I mean, I would rather see. Well, first off, I think that it might get through in and of itself, but if it doesn't get through, then we can put it to legal and risk. It's because they'll not.
Well, it's got to go to legal and risk.
identify.
It can't put it through without going to legal and risk. That's the chancellor's view now.
Okay. Well, in that case, at least we're starting the process now.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm just saying from a practical perspective.
Yeah.
Michael might disagree, but
Well, no,
You've got to start somewhere.
I mean, it'd be good to, before it goes to legal and risk, to know if something the board wishes to adopt, I suppose. That's all. So it's quite good to.
certainly I would suggest then that it goes to legal and risk after the first vote.
Yeah, yeah.
So what about grievances then?
Grievances, we don't want.
Say somebody has come with a sort of a compromising concern. But then again, 6 takes care of that.
6, or the executive can, 4/5 or something of the executive can just approve something in camera.
There you go.
I mean, for context, this is mainly designed for things like, I don't like the idea of election rules being put in camera, for instance, or things like that. It just seems a bit secretive, and that's the basis of this sort of rule.
Didn't we do the election rules stuff next camera?
Well, if we did, we couldn't reveal that X camera, because this doesn't apply to previous things.
Angela, did you get the changes for 2.8.6? Okay. So, any other further discussion on this? There's none. Regarding the power granted in Clause 20 of the AU Constitution, this board resolves to create rule concerning in-camera and authorizes the EO to alter the master copy accordingly. Moved by Felix, seconded by Grace. I dissented because I want to abstain from it. Those in favor?
Oh, you dissented?
Yeah, because I have to abstain from it. In favor, against, abstaining. The resolution carried. Grace, interaction with media policy.
Yes. Wait, sorry, that passed?
Yes. Yes, Grace.
Yeah, okay. So,
Thank you, all good.
yeah, so we're looking to amend clause 2.1 and then remove clause 6.1, so that the SRC pretty much have more capacity to speak to the media about UX, and increase awareness about the range of services that UX provide. So, for example, the way it's currently worded prevents the SRC from talking about UX in its entirety, including like student care, free breakfasts, grants and services it provides. So we do this.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? There's none. Regarding the power granted in clause 21 of the AE Constitution, this board resolves to amend
Can I
clause.
ask you a question? Does it still mean that the UX president and myself and Simone or Kieran have to be involved before the SRC president says anything?
No.
That hasn't changed?
That doesn't change.
Wait, no, I think
No,
this.
that doesn't. No,
Oh,
that's,
is that 6.2?
That's
Yeah, that,
Just for everyone's clarification.
I always have greatest trouble finding constitution.
It's pretty easy.
It's under adults.
Yeah, balance. I read that. Yes.
First one.
Governance.
My name's still incorrect.
Oh, you're kidding me?
what?
Whose name?
Mine.
On what?
It's ISSAC.
Where?
Oh my god, it's ISAAC. It's in the
I
Bible.
bloody fixed it.
Oh my
Where,
god.
where in this thing?
Send me an angry email, Isaac.
I will. I'm going to take this up.
Check-
Where
check
is
page,
it?
mate.
Go back to governance.
Oh, I see.
Ah,
Oh,
we fixed. We had it fixed.
I thought it was.
Yeah, just
How do
Don't
people
worry,
make
I'll
these
send
mistakes?
don't worry. I'll send myself an email.
It's the only
I'm
thing
not
I
sure
care
if it
about.
can be on my screen, but okay.
So Gary, like the question, SRC has never needed to go through us. You can make any comment. Actually,
Wait, what's this 6.
so yeah, this will actually remove that. So Simone, myself, and yourself wouldn't need to get involved in the SRC making any comment. So this is just related to UX, not SRC. Because it changes to the definition of elected reps here.
So
I'm 2 years.
there's no filtering process through Simone, and it's just cut Roche. The SRC.
Yeah,
Can we
That's-
see 6.1?
I believe
That's
there is
what the-
actually a 6.2.
that's what this will happen is.
There
so
was, yeah. okay.
6.1 is
Just further
this, Felix, like if you look at this is commenting about UX. And redefining the word elected reps here means that they wouldn't have to go through that process.
No, I know that. I was looking at 6.2
Yeah,
because I think that's already a savings provision to make sure that that's just like a so there's that sort of filters what the SRC says to an extent. Just doesn't prevent them from.
So then what happens if they do that anyway? A slap on the wrist.
Well, I mean, we've got the power to do various things to them. Some of the levers of which we've exercised already.
So does that clarify, Gary?
Sort of.
Better hope Butler doesn't.
Regarding the power granted in clause 21 of the AE Constitution, this board resolves to amend clause 2.1. Elected representatives includes but is not limited to UX board directors, student media directors. Remove clause 6.1. SRC staff and SRC elected representatives must not comment to the media and or on an issue that involves any other scheduled to affiliate department, UX board or UX service other than of the SRC, and authorizes the EO to alter the master copy accordingly. Can I have a mover moved by Grace, I think, second by Felix, any dissent? Those in favor? Those against? Those abstaining? The resolution carries.
How good is media freedom?
Let me just fix this.
Sorry, again, did that pass?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next item is rule concerning student media. Felix.
Well, on the topic of how good media freedom is, so there's a few miscellaneous sort of bits in here, but there's really only two substantive components. So the first is, so this is regarding the student media rule. And this is primarily concerning on-D editors, but sometimes obviously would involve student radio directors as well. If there's an issue with them and there's some sort of cause for concern, the board can create this independent committee. I will call this independent committee into, create one. that is the UX president, executive officer, and a nominee of student care, and they would look at perceived misconduct, and they'd make a recommendation to the board as to whether they would remove that Ondi editor or student radio director. Typically, a lot of the problems that arise with student media tend to be regarding the board, and having the UX president there. In my year, when I was an Ondi editor, we never had this issue, but there was always the concern that the UX president was already going to be a vote against us. And I think a truly independent committee could be just the staff, and that's what I think we've got in this area. So we've got the head of engagement, the executive officer, and a nominee of student care. So you've got the experience, the legal experience of the executive officer, you've got the head of engagement there sort of running the media aspect, and a nominee of student care, which is the generic aspect, which is untouched from before. And I think this just makes the independent committee much more independent, so that editors are not sweating basically going into what otherwise might be a more partisan inquiry. And then the second substantive part is just to remove some provisions that I believe were brought in 2017 that basically meant that it's very difficult for student radio volunteers, so people who typically run podcasts and the like for student radio, if they do those, to be dismissed. So you can have Ondi editors, for instance, they bring on sub-editors, and student radio directors, they bring on these volunteers. But student radio directors have this, what I believe to be an unnecessary provision, which prevents them from removing them if they do something wrong. They have to go through this lengthy process, which can take a month or maybe even longer than a month. And it's just a bit absurd. You should be able to take on and remove staff as you'd like. They are the elected editors and the elected student radio directors. And there are just some clauses about that I'd like repealed. And there's also one tiny little clause that just guarantees that board directors are entitled to come to student media committee meetings, which has been a bit of a grey area in the past. Just wanted to sort of clarify that.
Any questions, comments?
Can you vote on them separately?
I'm open to that, if you'd like.
I just want to vote against one.
Which one is it that you want to vote against?
I want to vote against
That's not the last one.
12.5.
Oh, okay. Why?
Oh, no, sorry, not that one, sorry. Wait. Hold on. The one...
All of the 12.1s are sort of basically grouped. If you knock out the first one, there's no point in having the other ones. So I hope that you're not objecting to one particular.
4.3, 4.5 is the same.
No,
Yeah.
what about the one... What was the one about the...
Oh, is that above?
The
Engagement one? That one? 10.2?
Yeah, that one.
What's your objection to that?
I just want to keep the present on.
Okay.
So is that different? Is that a different? Are you moving those separately, or do you?
Well, I'm happy to move that one separately if you'd like.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all.
The first resolution regarding the power granted in clause 20 of the AU Constitution, this board resolves to amend clause 10.2. The independent committee shall consist of UX head of engagement, the UX executive officer, and a nominee of student care, and authorizes the EO to alter the master copy accordingly. Moved by Felix, seconded by Grace, seconded dissented by Isaac. Those in favor? What's that? Are you? Those against? Those abstaining? The motion carried.
Did you vote against or abstain?
I guess
You voted in the abstain.
It was
I'm curious what that was.
I think that's up to the interpretation of the minute taker.
Regarding the power granted in clause
Right.
20 of the AU Constitution, this board resolves to remove clause 12.3 if a student radio directors wishes to remove any or all volunteers. Advice must be sought prior to removal from an independent committee consisting of the UX president, the executive officer, and the UX marketing and communication manager. 12.3.1, if the UX president is comfortable with the matter, the UX president shall represent the board in the independent committee. 12.3.2, if the UX vice president is also comfortable with the matter, the board shall nominate a director to represent in the independent committee. Clause 12.4, The Independent Committee shall provide advice to student radio directors regarding adherence to this rule, adherence to any voluntary code of conduct of UX, procedure, fairness, and natural justice, clause 12.5. The Independent Committee shall consult with student care and or any other body within UX and university deemed necessary by the Independent Committee. At clause 14.9, board directors are entitled to attend all meetings of the student media committee and authorizes the EO to author the master copy accordingly.
I think I missed some of that. Can you just read the whole thing?
Moved by Felix, seconded by Grace. Is there any dissent? There being none, I declare that carried. Now, actually, just on this item, I probably should bring the attention of the board. The current rule concerning student media is a bit weird because it has the old reference of student radio. Let's bring it up for you guys.
That's what I'm doing, mate. It's a bit of a weird thing.
Now, do we want the... So there's student radio here, and there's student radio there. A couple of student radio in there. Now, we have actually renamed student radio to on radio directors. And to me, in my view, it's probably just a typo, since if you look at this, the changes says student radio to on radio. So that's probably the changes that didn't carry over. Now, we can name it back to student radio, but if not, I will just consider it as an administrative change for me to just change it back to all this typo to on radio directors. Any opinions on this?
Seems reasonable.
Okay, so I just note that I'll be making administrative changes as per the Constitution on all those references of student radio directors to on radio directors. Okay, next item, Schedule 4. So this one is just that since we reintroduced the new branding, it is of my view that anyone who runs for UX election or to support a new branding, if not, why would you still run on the UX? I think it's pretty much a straightforward change. But yeah, questions, concerns?
First off, I have a question. Yes. I'm just curious whether this would, suppose it passes before elections, would this actually